He said his leg was broken. He said he was just a lost hiker. For 3 days, Elara believed him. She shared her hearth, her food, and even the fear of her debts with the stranger she had rescued. But Elara is a painter. She pays attention to detail. She noticed the way his dog, Cooper, brought the boot to the injured leg, inviting him to walk. She noticed the tension in Julian's eyes every time he performed his pain. This morning, Elara lied. She said she was going to town. Now, she is hiding behind the trees, watching her own home. And she sees him. He is standing. He is stretching. He is playing with Cooper. And in that moment, Elara realizes the real storm isn't outside. It's inside her house. The end of October in the Wind River Range was not a suggestion. It was a verdict. The snow had come early, a furious, premature blizzard that sought to bury the world in white. Inside her small cabin, Elara pressed a worn towel against the rattling window frame. The wind did not howl. It screamed, a high-pitched, abrasive sound that pressed against the log walls. Elara was a woman shaped by this solitude. She was tall and practical, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that highlighted the weary intelligence in her eyes. Her hands, usually stained with oil paint and turpentine, were raw from hauling the last of her winter firewood. She had moved to this isolated patch of Wyoming to escape noise, but this storm was a different kind of assault, a physical weight against the door. Then a new sound cut through the wind's relentless shriek. It was not a wolf. It was high, frantic, and desperate. A sharp bark, choked off by the driving snow, echoed from somewhere very close, just beyond her property line. Elara froze. She listened. The sound came again, weaker this time, an appeal. She grabbed her heavy canvas coat from the peg by the door. Going out was madness. Not going was impossible. She stepped into the white chaos. The snow was already past her knees, the air so cold it burned her lungs. She pulled her scarf over her face and navigated by memory, following the split-rail fence that marked her land. The barks were her only guide, small points of sound in the overwhelming static of the storm. She saw it 50 yards on, a dark shape barely visible. A late-model Jeep had slid clean off the icy mountain pass, its nose buried deep in a snowdrift. A frantic shape was lunging at the driver's side door. It was a dog, a striking creature, perhaps 2 or 3 years old. He was a husky mix, his thick coat a beautiful mix of slate gray and brilliant white. He was digging, clawing at the packed snow around the door, his movements fueled by panic. When he saw Elara, the dog, Cooper, let out one sharp, warning bark, then whined, looking desperately back at the window. Elara waded closer. Inside, a man was slumped against the driver's side, his face pale. Julian. He looked terribly out of place, wearing a technical shell jacket that looked far too clean and expensive for this landscape. "Help," he mouthed through the glass. Elara wrestled the rear door open, the wind trying to rip it from her grip. "My leg," Julian said, his voice strained as she climbed in. "It's trapped. The impact. I think it's broken." Elara assessed the situation. The metal was not bent. His foot was just wedged tight at a bad angle. "We have to get you out." It took several agonizing minutes of effort, but she finally pulled his leg free. He cried out, a low sound of pain that was quickly stolen by the wind. "I can't walk," he panted, his breath fogging the air. "You will," Elara said, her voice firm. "You have to." She hauled him out. He leaned his full weight on her, his arm draped over her shoulder. It was a brutal, slow-motion fight back to the cabin. The distance was short, but in the blizzard it felt like miles. They collapsed through the doorway, the storm slamming the door shut behind them. Julian fell onto the hearthrug, breathing heavily. Cooper, who had been nervously circling them the entire way, immediately pushed past Elara. The dog licked Julian's face, then, surprisingly, nudged Elara's cold hand with his wet nose, a silent, desperate thanks. The blizzard did not stop. For 2 days, the world was reduced to the 4 walls of the cabin and the constant abrasive sound of wind sanding the logs. Time blurred into a cycle of stoking the fire, brewing coffee, and listening. Elara was practical in her care. She rebandaged Julian's leg, her touch professional and distant. "It's not swelling much," she noted, her voice flat. "It just aches." "Deeply," Julian lied, hating how easily the words came. He watched her move. She was economical in her actions, never wasting a step, yet she always made sure Cooper's bowl was full before she tended to her own needs. The dog, in turn, had become her shadow, sensing a stability in her that he perhaps missed in his owner. That evening, the storm's voice dropped to a low moan, allowing for quiet. They sat by the fire, Cooper asleep on the hearth rug, a bridge of warm fur between them. "Why here?" Julian asked, gesturing to the cabin, the isolation. "You don't seem like someone who runs." Elara stared into the flames for a long time. "I didn't choose this, not really," she said softly, the admission costing her. "My father passed away 2 years ago. This was his house, ours." She took a shaky breath. "He left debts. I'm trying to keep it. But the Wyoming Heritage Bank isn't sentimental." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I'm losing it, Julian. I came here to paint, to escape the noise, and now I'm just fighting to keep the silence. It's hard to trust the world outside when it feels like it's just waiting to take what's left." Julian watched her, the firelight catching the weariness in her eyes. Her confession was raw, unvarnished. In his world, debt was a strategy, a number on a balance sheet. Here it was a ghost haunting her. His entire life was a performance, a carefully constructed role. With Elara, there was no performance. He felt the weight of her truth and, in that moment, the crushing burden of his own lie. The next afternoon, cabin fever had truly set in. Cooper, restless from the confinement, whined at the door before trotting over to the pile of Julian's damp gear. He nudged the pile with his nose, then emerged holding one of Julian's heavy hiking boots. He trotted to Julian, tail wagging, and dropped it squarely on his lap, an invitation. It was the boot for his broken left leg. The air in the room went still. Julian flinched, his smile tightening. "No, Coop, not now," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. He pushed the boot away. Cooper whined, confused by the rejection. Elara saw the exchange. A small questioning line appeared between her brows. Julian, forcing a laugh, said, "He just doesn't understand injured." Elara nodded slowly. "Right. He's just a bored dog, wanting a walk he can't have." She turned back to the window, but the image remained. The boot, the sharp word, the sudden tension in a room that had, just hours before, felt safe. On the third morning, the world went quiet. The relentless scream of the wind had ceased, replaced by the soft, rhythmic dripping of melting snow from the eaves. The storm had broken. "I have to get to town," Elara announced, pulling on her heavy boots. The atmosphere in the small cabin had grown thick with unspoken things. "We're low on supplies, and I need to get you more of that pain medication." "Right, of course," Julian said, shifting painfully on the sofa. "Be careful." She nodded, gave Cooper a quick scratch behind the ears, and left. The sound of her old truck's engine struggling to life, then fading down the pass, was the signal. Julian counted a full hour. The silence in the cabin was absolute. He looked at Cooper, who was watching him with intelligent, knowing eyes. Slowly, testingly, Julian placed his broken left foot on the floor. He pressed down. He stood up. He rose from the sofa and stretched, a long, deeply satisfying motion that worked the kinks from his back after 2 days of pretending to be an invalid. He felt a sharp pang of guilt, but it was overshadowed by the immense relief of freedom. He walked to the window. His leg was perfectly fine. He checked his phone. 1 weak bar of signal. Enough. "Come on, Coop," he whispered, grabbing his jacket. "We've both earned this." He stepped outside into the brilliant snow-blind white of the backyard. The air was frigid, clean, and still. Cooper was a blur of gray and white joy, leaping and diving into the deep drifts, sending plumes of powder into the air. Julian laughed, a real unrestrained sound. He found a sturdy stick half buried near the woodpile and snapped it clean. "Okay, boy, go long." He threw it. A sharp, happy bark from Cooper ripped through the quiet as the dog bounded after it. For 10 minutes it was just them, a man and his dog, partners in a game, the cabin and its lie forgotten. Elara was halfway down the mountain pass when she glanced at the passenger seat. Her wallet. She sighed, a puff of frustration in the cold cab, and turned the truck around. She parked and walked up the snowy path, preoccupied. It was the sound that made her stop. Laughter. A man's easy laugh. She looked up. Her shadow fell across the snow of the backyard. Julian was standing tall, his back to her, arm cocked. He threw the stick, and Cooper, barking with delight, chased it. She stood frozen, the wallet falling from her numb fingers. Julian, sensing the new stillness, turned. The smile vanished. Cooper, sensing the immediate shift in atmosphere, dropped the stick and trotted back, whining softly. "Elara," Julian started, his voice hollow. "You're back." She didn't speak. She just looked at his left leg, the one that was now bearing his full weight. "I can explain," he said quickly, walking toward her, his stride perfectly even. The lie crumbled. He confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. His name was not just Julian, it was Julian Vance, CEO of a massive tech firm. He wasn't a hiker. He was testing his fiancée, Vanessa, and his business partners. He had staged the disappearance in the remote Wyoming mountains to see who would try to take over his company and who would actually search for him. The injury was a lie. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She had shared her story, her fears about the bank, her struggle. She had brought this man into her sanctuary. And all of it, her home, her kindness, her fire, her food, had been nothing but a convenient stage, a backdrop for a billionaire's twisted game. She felt used. She felt insulted. The silence of the backyard was heavy, broken only by Julian's frantic attempts to explain. "Elara, it wasn't about you, I swear. It was a test, but for them, for my world." "And what am I?" she shot back, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Just collateral damage? A convenient safe house while you played your sick game?" "No," he insisted, stepping toward her. "It started that way, but it became—" He was cut off. A new sound invaded the clearing, a deep, rhythmic pulse that was not the wind. It was a mechanical heartbeat, growing rapidly in volume, thrumming against the log walls and rattling the windows. Cooper barked, a low, anxious sound, and ran toward the cabin, looking at Julian. "What is that?" Elara asked, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by confusion. Julian's face went white. The guilt was gone, replaced by the look of a man who was cornered. "She found me." They watched through the front window. A sleek black helicopter was descending into the clearing 50 yards from the cabin, its powerful downdraft flattening the tall, frozen grass. The machine settled. The engine whined down. A side door slid open, and a woman emerged. She was the absolute antithesis of this place. This was Vanessa. She wore slim black pants tucked into expensive, knee-high leather boots with sharp heels. Her cashmere coat was immaculate. She navigated the snow-patched mud as if it were a personal insult, her eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, fixed on the cabin. Julian stepped onto the porch. Elara followed, remaining in the shadow of the doorway, a silent, furious witness. "Julian!" Vanessa's voice was high and sharp, like breaking glass. She didn't sound relieved, she sounded annoyed. "Your little game is over. The board is in chaos. Do you have any idea what this stunt has done to the stock?" She strode toward him, finally pulling off her sunglasses. She barely glanced at Elara, dismissing her as part of the scenery. Cooper, ever curious, trotted up to her, sniffing at this new person. He nudged her boot. "Ugh!" Vanessa recoiled, pulling her foot back as if the dog were vermin. She wiped her boot on a patch of clean snow. "Get this thing away from me. Let's go, Julian. We have to do damage control now." She had not asked if he was hurt. She had not asked if he was okay. She had only mentioned the stock. The contrast was brutal. Elara, who had shared her last supplies. Vanessa, who was disgusted by a dog's nose. Julian looked at his fiancée, truly seeing her for the first time. The polished veneer, the ambition, the cold, empty center. "No," Julian said. Vanessa stopped. "What did you say?" "I'm not going," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We're done, Vanessa." She stared, incredulous. "You're joking. You're staying here? In this shack? With her?" "Go home, Vanessa." She scoffed, a sound of utter disbelief. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back to the helicopter. The door slammed shut, and within minutes the machine was a fading pulse against the sky. A profound silence descended. Julian turned back to Elara, his face full of relief, of hope. "Elara, She held up a hand. The anger hadn't softened. It had solidified. "She may be awful," Elara said, her voice low, "but at least she wasn't pretending. She didn't lie to me." "Elara, I didn't mean to hurt you." "Go," she whispered. "What?" "Get out," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Take your dog, take your lies, and go. Go back to your world. You don't belong here." He was stunned. "But I chose this. I chose you." "You don't get to choose," she said, tears finally breaking free, hot and angry. "I'm not one of your options. Go." She turned and went inside. The sharp, heavy sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was his final answer. Julian stood on the porch, defeated. Cooper came and sat by his feet, whining softly, looking back at the closed door. 3 months crawled by. Winter, though still holding the mountains in its icy grip, gradually softened its edges. The relentless white began to recede, exposing patches of muddy earth and the faint green promise of spring. Elara painted, sometimes with fierce dedication, sometimes with a hollow ache. The anger at Julian had slowly given way to a profound sense of loneliness, sharpened by the memory of warmth that had turned out to be a lie. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in her mailbox. It was from Wyoming Heritage Bank. Her heart hammered with dread, anticipating another foreclosure notice. But inside, it wasn't a warning. It was a statement, stark and undeniable. Mortgage account, paid in full. There was no name, no sender address, just a small, elegant note, almost hidden at the bottom. From a private trust, settlement completed. Elara stared at it, a complex mix of emotions churning within her. Relief so immense it almost buckled her knees. But also a fresh wave of resentment. He had used money again to fix his mistakes. It was his way. But it was also freedom. Her father's house was safe. Weeks later, the snow had retreated almost entirely, leaving swollen creeks and the scent of damp earth. Elara was sitting on her porch, sketching the emerging wildflowers. The air was soft, filled with the buzz of early bees. Then she heard it, a familiar, joyful bark, closer than any sound she'd heard in months. Her head snapped up. A gray and white blur raced down the path toward her. Cooper. He looked thinner, his fur slightly matted, but his tail was a furious blur of happiness. He bounded onto the porch, a small, worn, squeaky toy shaped like a squirrel clutched in his mouth. It was the toy Elara had bought for him in town during her ill-fated trip. He dropped it at her feet, then sat, panting, his intelligent eyes fixed on her. A moment later, a figure emerged from the tree line. It was Julian. He was no longer dressed in expensive tech wear, but in worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and sturdy hiking boots. His face was leaner, etched with lines Elara hadn't seen before, lines of struggle and perhaps humility. He was driving an older model Ford pickup truck, muddy and practical, completely different from the sleek Jeep. He stopped a few feet from the porch, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. He looked at Elara, then at Cooper, then back at Elara. He ran away, Julian said, his voice raspy. From Pinedale. This is the 4th time. He just kept running this way. Elara looked at Cooper, who was now nudging her hand with his nose, clearly wanting to be petted. Julian swallowed hard. I sold it all. The company, the shares. It was a fight, a legal battle with Vanessa and her family. They tried to declare me incompetent, to take everything. But I won, Elara. I won, and then I let it all go. Every last dollar was liquidated into a trust. This payment for your house, that was the first thing I did. Not to buy you, to pay back what I took, to give you the peace I stole. He paused, looking directly into her eyes. I'm not asking you to take me back. I don't deserve that. I'm just asking for a chance to start over, from scratch, truly from scratch, if you'll let me. Elara looked at Julian, then down at Cooper, who was now resting his head on her lap. The dog looked up at her, his eyes soft, trusting. He had chosen. Slowly, Elara reached out. Not to Julian. She reached down and gently scratched Cooper behind his ears, her fingers tangling in his soft fur. A silent, tentative acknowledgement. A small but undeniable beginning. Julian and Elara learned that our deepest connections are not built on perfection, but on the courage to be real, even after we have been broken. And sometimes, as Cooper showed us, loyalty is the only map we need to find our way home. If this story of forgiveness and new beginnings resonated with you, a simple like helps it find others, and we would be so honored if you subscribed. Your reflections in the comments are what truly give these stories life. Please feel free to share this, and we hope to see you on the next journey, which is waiting for you right now.